It's all about law, society, scholarship, and fandom. Welcome to Semantic Shenanigans.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Semantic Shenanigans, Episode 8. I am Janet Gershon-Siegel, and here with me from an undisclosed location somewhere in the heart of the country is my co-host and partner in crime, Shanna Gilkison.
Hello, and I will not give away my location except to say there will be a lot of corn soon.
You know, when they put you into witness protection, it always seems to be someplace where there's, the corn is as high as an elephant's eye.
It's because nobody wants to go there.
This explains a lot.
Except for, aliens and crop circles and stuff. But I haven't seen any of those either, so I guess maybe even they're bored.
Well, not to get political, but apparently there's an alien hotline where you can, turn folks in, human folks in for overstaying their visas and whatnot. And people for real are calling in and saying that they've spotted, little green folks and whatnot.
Burning in E.T., that's cold.
We'll build a wall and we'll have Saturn pay for it.
Yeah, except, that laugh you just heard is our special guest today, Gabriel Cruz. We'll just go ahead and introduce you now. What the hell?
Sure, what the hell?
So, Gabriel Cruz is joining us from Bowling Green State University. He's a colleague of mine, and I dare say study buddy extraordinaire. He's in the School of Media and Communication with me. And Gabe, why don't you say hello to the nice people?
Hey, how are y'all doing? I'm happy to be here. I was told I'm supposed to sound semi-literate and halfway clever, so I'll see what I can do.
Good job so far.
Yeah, awesome start. Okay, we got out of the gate strong. So what have you been doing the last month?
Me or Gabe?
Either of you.
Go ahead, Gabe.
I've spending a lot of time doing things that are probably not nearly as productive, and I'll go ahead and preface this by saying I'm very sure my advisor's not listening. I've been pleading and making bargains with whatever power will deliver me from the dissertation. That's what I've been doing. Been rearranging the furniture on a sinking ship.
And ladies and gentlemen, I will tell you that even though Gabe and I are in the same program at the same school, he is going to sound more rested and articulate than I do because he has been finished with his coursework, whereas I'm just trying to wrap up last papers and assignments, and I hate my life right now.
Yeah, no, I remember being where you are right now, Shanna, because I'm in my third year. I'm finishing my third year. When I was finishing my second year, like Shanna is, I was ready to just bang my face on a keyboard for 17 pages and turn it in, because I could not conjure a will to care about what I was writing at that point. Just so burnt out.
That's pretty much what's happening right now. And it's, I have really good stamina for, things academic, but part of it is just that, number one, ever since I went back to school to even finish my bachelor's degree in 2009, I have been going hard for 8 years straight. So that's part of it. And also just because PhD programs are just so much more demanding, and I've had to learn to give up some of my perfectionism as much as it makes me crazy.
Yep.
Oh yeah, definitely. You can't look at it a 50th time. You have to stop after a while and say, okay, we're gonna put a bow on this and call it done.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. These projects going in over the next week here, they're only going to get looked at twice. I don't have time for number 3, let alone 50. Just have it cleaned and burned. I'm ready. Pull the ripcord.
And then send it out, into the wild, much like a baby bird, just kick it right out of the nest. So for the past month, I have been editing, although actually not too much, the last year's work in progress. I'm an author, Gabe.
Right.
So, and I do a bunch of other stuff, but that's one of the things I do. So last year's WIP is kind of in the middle of beta reading, and feedback's been good so far, so yay. And I'm about 12 chapters, I think it is, maybe it's 13 now, into the sequel. It's about 33,000 words. It's called The Real Heart of the Universe, because last year's was The Real Hub of the Universe. And so I just, yesterday I wrote a Victorian wedding, and today I'm looking at a bunch of maps. And this is what I do. It's a lot of research, and also gearing up for next month, in a couple of weeks. Actually, it's in less than 2 weeks. Oh my God. My husband and I are going to Cape Cod, which we go to every year, for our anniversary. But this year is a biggie, because this year, on May 25th, we will be married 25 years.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And they said it wouldn't last. No, they didn't, actually. We're very well suited for each other. I'm an extremely lucky person. So, yay. Hi, Jay.
Hi, Jay. Does he listen?
A little. When he's here, he mainly listens to my half of the conversation, so he gets kind of this disjointed, idea of the show. So it's probably a very different experience from someone listening on iTunes or whatnot.
Okay, well, make him listen to the part where we told him hi.
I will do that.
So, and before we get into it, can I just make an announcement, updatey kind of thing from last month?
Hell yeah.
Okay, so listeners, you might remember our special guest was another colleague of mine, Julia Largent, who has magically blended the worlds of documentary and fandom together. And Julia just announced today that she got a tenure track position at McPherson College in Kansas. So we're just all really stoked and proud of her. For those of you who have not done an academic life, your 4th year is insane, because you have the national job search thing that you have to do if you want to work. And if you've been keeping up with the news at all, academia has been a really tough place to find these tenure track jobs, what with colleges wanting to pay adjuncts to do the same jobs but for cheaper, and really leaving a lot of well-educated people very job insecure. So things are turning a corner now. Quite a few of my colleagues have gotten really great positions, really great offers. So the jobs are getting to be out there again, and we are just so happy that to be able to tell you that Julia has this position. And if you're considering going to college, or if you know somebody who is, and you're into documentary and or fandom studies, then McPherson should be on your radar, because our own Julia is going to be the guru for that.
Congratulations, Julia. Yoo-hoo!
Woo!
Woo! Okay, I'm done. Gabe.
Yes.
Yay!
Let's do your part right now. So,
All right.
Tell us a bit about what your research agenda entails.
All right. So, as mentioned earlier, I'm a third-year PhD student here at BGSU. I got my master's at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and I did my master's study on online news media and racism. And so I looked at like immigrants and that kind of stuff. And so I'm still really interested in things like ideology and, prejudice and that kind of thing and social issues. But I've taken it in a different direction. Right now, what I'm studying, what I've been building towards up to this point is studying like racism and gender issues and class stuff within the context of fiction, in particular within comic books. I chose comic books because I'm a huge nerd. And when I say huge nerd, I have read more Tolkien than most people have heard of. Unabashedly, that's sort of the air that I breathe. And so I thought, well, if I speak this language already, why not, do something intellectual with it? So that's what I do. I'm a critical scholar, which means that I look for the ways in which these sort of messages within fiction and comics in particular, like I said, play in service of power or subvert it or, contradict it, that kind of thing. I take the things that we love and find out why they're bad for us. In short,
you ruin everything.
My gosh.
I do, and I can't turn it off.
It was you.
Yeah. So, but I also try to look for positive stuff too. I mean, because and I received this advice early on. Just because you're a critic doesn't mean you have to be negative. You can look for positive stuff as well, and good examples of positive storytelling and messages. So yeah.
So when you talk about this, looking at issues of power within comic books, what does knowing who has the power in comics, how does that help your average reader down the road? Let's say, like how does this research affect fans?
Right. So, the reason that I study this sort of stuff and how it parlays into real time, impact is that it comes back to a bit of a catchphrase that you see from time to time. And that is that representation matters. So historically, comics have been written by older white heterosexual men, men who identified as men and all that kind of stuff. So, which isn't bad in and of itself, but the problem is that historically, when they've gone outside of their, let's say, cultural experiences and tried to represent, people of color or ethnic or religious minorities or gender minorities, sexual orientation, that kind of stuff, it gets bad. I don't know how else to put it. It gets pretty bad. I think one of the best examples I've heard was that I was talking to a comic historian and he said that, Batgirl, for example, was just stepping a little bit outside of the usual, Batman realm. And it sort of became a bit of a joke, right? Because people couldn't take the character seriously because the person who was writing that material didn't know really any of the cultural experiences that one would expect associated with, being a female. And I remember reading this great quote today, and I forget who said it, but you can't be what you can't see. So when we're talking about representation, that sort of stuff matters. I remember listening to a podcast from NPR, and there was this guy who was talking about going to college. He's a first-generation student. He was a young black male, and he had no one to look up to. He had no role models in reality for him to look up to, and so he didn't know what he was trying to achieve. He knew that college was supposed to get him somewhere good, but he didn't know what that would look like. Similarly, a lot of us turn to fiction, in particular fans, turn to fiction for role models, for people to not necessarily emulate because we understand that they are fiction, but that have qualities that we like, that we might aspire to. I know that was the case when I was a kid. Nightcrawler from X-Men. Nightcrawler and Gambit were two of my favorite fictional characters. And, if you're not familiar, they are from the X-Men comics. And I first, consumed that material as a TV show. But I always felt like I always liked Nightcrawler because he was an outsider. For those who don't know, and I don't know if you can tell from my name, I'm Mexican-American, grown up in the South. And as a fan of the X-Men TV show, watching Nightcrawler, who is, who's blue, looks like a demon, and is a good guy, and seeing him deal with being an otherized person within that material, I could relate. And it meant a lot to me to have a character who was, like myself, visually marked from my surroundings, because I grew up in a predominantly white area, who could be a hero, who could be a positive influence on his community. And I think that is, a very important thing that we can't underestimate when it comes to folks consuming this material.
I think that's a great point, Gabe. That's something that came up in my intercultural communication class the other night. And we were actually talking about ways to get younger people interested in learning foreign language, because one of my classmates had just done a presentation about that. And statistically, findings were that teenagers were saying that learning a second language was a waste of time, and it's that privileging of English. Mm-hmm. And so we were brainstorming different ways to get people interested in that. And the topic of representation came up, and, we were talking about Spanish, and I said, on the last Star Wars movie, Rogue One, Diego Luna did not Americanize his accent. Like, he got to speak naturally for the role, and he's a hero. So while he wasn't speaking Spanish, we were very aware of his accent, and that would be an example of good positive representation. Whereas we brought up another example of Breaking Bad. Usually you've got people from Mexico portrayed as being part of the drug cartels and stuff because of where that story is geographically situated. And so you don't have that positive representation that you do perhaps in a Star Wars movie, this last case.
Yeah, I'd agree. I remember watching, I saw Rogue One a couple times. I remember thinking, it was great to hear somebody talk who sounded like similar to my dad and other men that I've known from Mexico. And that meant something. And the same thing going like, my mind immediately goes to Jimmy Smits and Sons of Anarchy, right? Yeah. And the Mayans, and who are initially portrayed as very sort of stereotypical Latino gangsters and riding motorcycles and all that kind of stuff. And then over the course of the show become much more developed and nuanced, and you see them as fully functioning humans. They're dimensional, right? They're not just there to serve a narrative function of being a villain that the white antiheroes can come up against, right?
It's Sons of Anarchy is a great example too, because the characters were very, very complex and well developed, I thought. And I am so stoked too, because the Mayans are getting their own show.
I will say this though: it is hard for me to see Walton Goggins and not think of Venus. If I watch Justified, or if I watch anything else with Walton Goggins, or like any Tarantino movie, it's like I can't not see Venus. Oh man.
The funny thing about that show, though, was that it got pretty, misogynistic from time to time in the way they portrayed the old lady and stuff. But they treated, for the folks who don't know, Venus is a transgender character, transgender woman, and they actually treat Venus very, very well, for the most part, which I kind of was surprised by, but also pleased.
Yeah, I would agree. When I first saw the character, I thought, oh man, this is going to be a trope. And then, no, like there's a dimensional human being, being represented here. At least in some capacity. I won't say it's perfect representation or anything like that, but it was to the step of the good, right?
Yeah, and the thing that surprised me a lot too, not only, and you know what, like I kind of have a policy that I don't worry too much about spoilers, especially if something's been canceled for like a couple of years. So if you haven't seen it by now, then oh well. So I will go ahead and say that despite the love story between Venus and one of the other bikers. The other thing that kind of like was refreshingly surprising to me was Katie Seagal's character Gemma actually treating Venus with a lot of dignity and respect. There was an episode where Venus got beat up, and Gemma actually had a lot of human compassion, something that she wasn't really known for.
No.
But she extended it to Venus, and I thought, wow, that's really kind of incredible.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So talk to us a little bit about your dissertation, if you can, or is that something that you have to like not do spoilers for?
No, that's fine. That's fine. I don't mind talking about it. So my dissertation is looking at. I'm doing a what is called a critical rhetorical analysis of 5 different Marvel characters and the way in which they deal with different subject matter. I'm looking at what their origins say about them, because origin stories and superpowers and that kind of stuff, if you're not familiar, often say a lot about characters and to some degree, reflect race and gender issues. For example, black superheroes like Black Panther and Luke Cage, their superpowers tend to be physical and exaggerations of physical strength. And other physical aspects like speed or stamina, whereas white superheroes tend to be their powers often are more external. Think like flying or psychic abilities or that kind of stuff, which sort of feeds into the racial stereotype of the ultra physical, hyper violent black body. So I'm looking at origin stories and superpowers. I'm looking at general representations when it comes to race, class, and gender. I'm looking at social issues that are being addressed, either being addressed either intentionally or unintentionally. And what's important about that is that so comic books might have storylines and that kind of stuff where authors are intentionally trying to deal with the thing. For example, Marvel Civil War dealt a lot with issues of government surveillance and that kind of thing, and how we regard the other, and whether or not there should be, whether or not we should know who everybody is and that kind of stuff. But unintentionally, it may deal with other subject matter, and so that's one of the things I'm looking at, historically. Like the X-Men, they didn't start off. Stan Lee said that the X-Men did not intentionally start off as a parallel for the civil rights movement, but that's sort of what it became, right? So I'm looking at various subject matter like that, what's in the comics and that kind of thing. And the characters that I'm looking at are for white masculinity. I am looking at Captain America. I'm using Miles Morales for Latino masculinity. Miles Morales, if you're not familiar, is the new Spider-Man from the Ultimate Universe who just crossed over into the mainstream. Peter Parker's still around, but Miles Morales is kind of his protege. I'm looking at Jean Grey. She represents white femininity. I'm looking at Luke Cage as black masculinity, and I'm looking at Mystique from the X-Men because she represents, like, in my estimation, this whole genre of comic book characters who are not overtly raced, but are raced in a subtle manner. So, for example, if you're not familiar, Mystique is blue. If you've seen any X-Men character, she's the blue female. She could appear as any race or any gender, but she is consistently, whether it's Rebecca Romaine Stamos or, Jennifer Lawrence. I was about to blank on her name. Jennifer Lawrence almost always is a white female. Why is that? What are the variations on that and that kind of stuff? So even like Rocket Raccoon or Groot or any number of other characters who don't fit neatly into a race, class, and gender category, there's usually other ways of telling, right? Narratively, so to speak. Also visually, looking at, how the art factors into this, what motifs and themes are recurring, that kind of thing. If that makes any sense.
It makes total sense. So, what kind of things are you finding, or are you there yet in your study? What's happening with that?
Well, right now I'm just sort of getting the materials together. So I'm making lists of, some of these characters go back to the 40s, right? Captain America goes back to the 40s. Jean Grey and Luke Cage go back to the 60s. And so for these characters, I'm doing some research and coming up with lists of comics and story arcs that I need to obtain and read and analyze and that kind of stuff. Which is easier said than done for some characters. Like I said, there's a wealth of information for a lot of these folks. Whereas like Miles Morales, I think was only created in 2011. So he only goes back about 6 years. So that's easy enough to get a hold of. I haven't done any digging into it, but I've been doing a lot of reading in previous research. what other scholars are saying about it. And one thing about this, I'll go ahead and say, so I'm coming at this from communication studies, but there is not a unified comic studies realm. There are a lot of people who come at it from different angles, such as English literary criticism and visual media and all that kind of stuff. But not so much from comics. And so I'm having to pull from some different area. A lot of it deals with, for the most part, with like hypersexuality and Black identity. Not to say that there's other stuff, but for the most part, that's what's being covered. I was trying to think for a minute. So yeah, like I said, I haven't started the dissertation proper in the analysis yet, but I'm getting there. I've done some other stuff. I did an analysis of Marvel's Avengers and how they deal with xenophobia and racism and how there are sort of parallels prominent in there. Kind of like and I think it's kind of fitting. I'm interested to see how it plays out in the new Thor movie, but the Hulk and Thor relationship, right? So you have Thor who is white masculinity, royalty and nobility, conventionally good looking, and just like right out of like the notion of the superior race, right, from the Nazis. And then you have Hulk, who is this otherized, colored body kind of thing, primitive, lacking of intellect, sort of deceptive, unable to be really trusted because they have a contentious relationship all throughout the Avengers movie. Even, going as far as the Hulk, sucker punching Thor when he gets the chance. So the idea is that, and some people might be kind of rolling their eyes like, well, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. And to that, some extent, I would say that's true. Everything doesn't mean everything, but when it occurs enough times, you start to see like patterns, right? You need two dots to make a line. So yeah, once this stuff has been happening, and it all evidence points to that it has over the course of decades, then we have to make something of that. We have to be aware. Part of this is just understanding what it is we're putting in our heads.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to something that we talked about several episodes ago. In fact, I think it was probably our second or third episode. I don't know, maybe even our first, where we talked a little bit about toxic fandom and how privilege operates within fandom. And so I kind of had to unpack privilege a little bit, because when people hear that word, they immediately a lot of times just kind of cringe and shut down, because they think that what we're talking about is economic privilege or class privilege. And so I kind of had to explain how it actually operates as what the default normal is for you, and so it becomes pretty invisible. So the things that you were just saying about the Hulk, and some people going, oh well, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, it's kind of hard to see that it means something when you're coming from that position of privilege, when it's something that you typically don't have to worry about.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say so. And I understand what you mean. Talking about privilege is kind of rough. I'm from, I grew up on Chicken Farm Road in the middle of nowhere in North Carolina. And it, surrounded by the American side of my family and, just poor working folk. And you talk about privilege, and people are like, well, I wasn't given anything. I work for everything I have. And so, well, calm down for a minute. Like, no one's calling you a bad person. And actually, I think of privilege as it can be a type of superpower, but that gets into another conversation. But yeah, people do get kind of sensitive about that stuff. So yeah, it's nerds in particular. Oh my goodness, and again, I will recall I am a huge dyed in the wool nerd, but man, like some folks just don't want to hear it,
True.
They don't. And the real challenge is to, as well as I do, sometimes we spend entire semesters trying to unpack these ideas, and we still don't have a right answer. And it's because, if there was a right answer, then we would just flip the switch on society and it would stop being a problem. So trying to explain to people in just 5 or 10 minutes or in the space of a Facebook post or whatever, it's almost impossible to do. So I think that maybe the best thing that we can do is kind of keep trying to have conversations like this and kind of get people to understand what we're really talking about through something accessible like comics or through fandom or something like that. So that way they can think of everyday examples a little bit differently without necessarily feeling threatened.
Yeah, I'd agree. So I'm a big fan of what's called media literacy, and that is understanding what it is you're seeing and not just becoming a passive consumer of it. And to your point, there's no silver bullet for solving these sort of issues, but I think that something like media literacy and understanding and thinking critically about what it is that we consume, even if we're fans of it, can help us to, identify problematic areas. Especially since, there's a wealth of work from the social scientific perspective about, what media does to us when we consume it without thinking, right? There was a study that I actually cited in one of my recent exams about how individuals who are not familiar with Latinos are more likely to rely on fictional and fictional representations as well as the news regarding Latinos informing their opinions, as opposed to those who have real life experiences with people who are from Latin American countries. So we kind of think, oh, well, I know it's fiction and I know this, this is going to hurt me, but our brains just don't function that way. And identifying that will go a long way towards, helping, people to understand and realize the ways in which things like privilege or other social capital benefits work in our society.
Now, one of the things that you just mentioned, you were talking about some studies that were done with a more social scientific perspective, and that's something that we really haven't talked about on the show yet. Can you just kind of maybe give a quick explanation about what that is compared to the type of research that you do?
Sure. So, and with keeping that in mind, that this is not my area of expertise, but I have read quite a bit of it for my preliminary exams, which decided, if I want to, being a third year. Social scientific work studies humans often through what is called a quantitative lens. And that is to say, looking at demographics and data and statistics and behavior in particular. So, for this particular research, the experiment was that they polled individuals. They came up with like a sample size of individuals of people who matched a certain description. I think these were all middle class white Americans, who have live in a certain geographic area, I think. And asked them, questioned them about their media consumption habits, and then asked them questions about their perceptions about Latinos or Latinx folk, I suppose, as the phrase is. And they use a very methodical, scientific procedure and method for coming to their answers. And so a lot of it is more numbers based. I'm not a numbers guy. I played Dungeons and Dragons, and that's about as far as my math goes, which is basic addition and subtraction. So they take a much more numbered, scientific approach to it. This is when you see, like, the Pew Research Center does social scientific work, right? And looking at demographic information and the analysis of people's behavior and that kind of stuff. They answer often the what question, right? So what is this and how prevalent is it? And to some degree, they can answer the why somewhat. What I deal with is more the why of it. It's more the, what is this? So if that study looks at the representations on TV and how people consume it, I would, from that same angle or from a similar angle, I would be looking at what that actually looks like and how that could be changed and what is it rooted in, right? So there's a point of convergence, but two different ways of getting to addressing that subject matter. Yeah. Like I said, I don't do numbers very well, but I certainly appreciate the data and those who do,
Yeah, and folks should understand too that even though social scientific research is more numbers driven, and maybe you might consider it more rigorous in terms of scientific method, but really both forms of research need each other. So, somebody like Gabe or myself would come in and, we'd make some observations, we'd try to maybe explain what's going on, and then that would be taken up by social scientific people who would kind of just go out there and get some raw numbers on who it's really happening for, when it's really happening for them, that kind of thing. Then they finish, they come to their conclusions, and then so we kind of see it through a new lens, and then your qualitative and critical people come back in and say, okay, well, why is that happening here but not here? So it's just this endless cycle. You need both kinds of research, and even qualitative and critical research can be pretty rigorous. It's just that we are describers and not counters.
Exactly. So to your point, I think a good example that folks have probably encountered is we've all heard about the opioid epidemic, right? The abuse of prescription pills and that kind of stuff, and how it's sweeping through the country, in particular the Midwest. And the numbers, the social scientific folk will tell you, well, this appears to be happening predominantly among white middle to lower middle class individuals, typically, white individuals of, like I said, a certain age, certain economic background, that kind of stuff. They'll tell you the how far, how widespread that is. It falls to scholars who do critical work and qualitative work, or more qualitative, I suppose, but, people who are sort of in the same vein of what you and I do in terms of being, being qualitative data, will look at the why. Why is that happening? What is leading people to use prescription drugs in this way? So the two areas really complement each other pretty well in filling in a broader picture of what's happening.
Absolutely. So what else do we need to know about comic books and representation?
Well, yes. What you should sort of know is okay, there's two things that I just had like 5 thoughts at the same time, and I'm going to try to parse them apart a little bit. One is to understand that diversity, the quantity of diversity is not the same as quality of diversity. Right? So, for example, there's a new comic out from Marvel called America, and it follows a superheroine named America Chavez. She is Black and Latina. She is identifies as queer and has 2 lesbian mothers. That's her backstory, and I've only read the first issue. I picked it up, I think, last month. I don't know if they're on issue 2 or 3 or what yet, but I haven't like turned a scholastic out of that yet and parsed it apart and all that kind of stuff. But I can say that it's a step in the right direction to have these sort of different characters, as opposed to your Wolverines and Captain Americas and Superman and Batman and all these who are sort of cookie cutter white males. But whether or not this holds up to good quality dimensional representations of other identity of a queer person of color remains to be seen, right? So just because it has there's this book written by Donald Bogle that talks about representation of African Americans in film and TV, and he talks about how in the early days of film, Black actors, once they got away from blackface, once people got away from blackface, you had Black actors who were pretending or acting, I should say, who were acting out characters who were what white people thought of Black people, right? So in that way, you had a metaphorical Black person in blackface, right? So the diversity was there in terms of checking that box, but the quality wasn't very good. Similarly, just because you see it happen doesn't mean it's necessarily as good as it could be, or that it's not problematic in some way, shape, or form. The other thing is, if you're a fan of comics, I would encourage you to look for lesser known imprints, lesser known labels that talk about or that deal with this sort of subject matter. So The classic example was Milestone Comics, which only lasted for 3 years. It was a offshoot of DC, and they dealt with it was written and created by black authors and writers, and they dealt with black characters and stories set in traditionally black environments and that kind of stuff. And it was lauded, it was praised now as being a really good representation. And it was sort of off the beaten path. The downside is it only lasted 3 years because they didn't sell very well. At the time, people weren't receptive. So unfortunately, it's like Firefly, right? People didn't catch on in the moment. And so now we can only lament what could have been.
Yeah, they didn't get it until they saw Serenity.
Absolutely. And so similarly, look, I love DC and Marvel. More Marvel. DC's okay. I really like Marvel. But look for other comics. Look for other labels. Look for other imprints, offshoots, and that kind of thing. Often, if you only want to stick to those because that's what you know, bear in mind that they often have like different offshoot imprints that they can do. Those are like where you'll find like passion projects and that kind of stuff because the companies understand that those aren't going to have as broad a range, and so there's less need to keep up with like images and stuff. But I don't know. I have mixed feelings about the state of comics and comic book material right now. So, for example, they're doing a new Spider-Man movie, right? And so we're getting Peter Parker again. And I like Peter Parker. I like Spider-Man. I'm a big fan. But I was really hoping for a Miles Morales. I was really hoping that they were going to go in a new direction. And I can't decide if I like it or not. I'm kind of irritated. They're using aspects of the Miles Morales Spider-Man in this movie. In particular, like there's a Asian character who shows up in the Miles Morales run as sort of like a sidekick, and he apparently shows up in this new Spider-Man movie. So I'm like, you could have. You even took from that material, but why didn't you? On the other hand, I don't know. Maybe they'll upset the apple cart a little bit, and something new could come out of it.
So out of all the comics out there right now, and if you wanted to even take that question to mean films that have comics as source material, you have a preference, or I guess I would say, what in your evaluation is the one that kind of, I guess I want to say, gets it right? What's the one that does the best job of getting it right?
So, it gets it right in what way? Let me ask you to clarify.
In terms of representation, as far as race goes, and even gender, because you do gender too, but still maybe remains accessible to multiple audiences. Okay,
so I recently read for a project, but enjoyment as well. I recently read the new Ghost Rider series, which is featuring Robbie Reyes, and you may have seen him on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. He's shown up there for part of the newest season. So he has so if you're not familiar, if you remember Johnny Blaze and all that kind of and all that stuff from back in the day, or the Nicolas Cage movies, which I only saw a little bit of, and that was as much as I really cared to. The Ghost Rider is a supernatural driver, essentially, who has powers from hell, kind of thing. And this iteration, Robbie Reyes drives a muscle car, and so it takes place in East LA. And I'm not familiar with the East LA Latina experience, but there were parts of it that resonated with me as a Mexican American. There were things about commitment to family and obligations, and growing up in a poor neighborhood or a bad neighborhood, and feeling a sense of, on the one hand, wanting to help out, but at the same time wanting to leave and get out and do something better for yourself and that kind of thing. And so, like, that one I think is a pretty decent example. Now they kind of whitewashed him for the TV show. I mean, he wasn't bad, but the only way that you knew that he was Latino was that he was brown and that he every now and again spoke a little bit of Spanish, but that's about it.
Oh man!
Right?
Well,
right.
I can't even. I mean, it's understand that I when I was in law school, I lived with a guy named Peter Garcia, and he was pale like skim milk. You don't have to be brown skinned to be Latino.
Right. So it's obvious that they were pulling from the source material, but they didn't stay faithful to it, in my estimation. So I would say the comic is pretty good, and I like the TV show, but the comic does a pretty good job. I'm trying to think of anything others. I'm a big fan of Deadpool. In fact, I just wrote a book chapter on him, but I don't think it gets that. I can't. It deals with mental illness in a very real and heavy way, but I can't speak to its authenticity. I can say that it was, there were times mental illness was a punchline and times when it was very serious, which was kind of interesting for Deadpool. But I don't know. I mean, there's examples out there, certainly. Oh, Ta-Nehisi Coates, I should say. Ta-Nehisi Coates is writing currently the Black Panther series. So if you're not familiar, Ta-Nehisi Coates is a author and a social critic, and he writes for the Atlantic, I think, as well as maybe some other publications. And he does, social critique and that kind of stuff, and talks about issues with Black America and that kind of thing. So he's recently been charged. I think he's written 6 issues, maybe up to 12 issues of the newest Black Panther run, which, if you saw Marvel Civil War, I'm talking about, and if you didn't, Black Panther is a African hero. I would very much like to qualify, though, that Black Panther is an African hero in as much as he's what white people thought of African heroes. So there's a great, so my fiance and I are sitting, watching the movie the other day, and we're watching Civil War, and this is like the 3rd time I've seen it, and the first time she has, and she's like, "What is Wakanda?" She did 2 years of Peace Corps in Africa, and she's laughing at these names. Wakanda is the name of the country that Black Panther's from, and she's laughing at that kind of stuff, and where's her accent? And this, so again, heavy qualification there, but from what I've understood, Ta-Nehisi Coates in his run for Black Panther has done a pretty good job, dealing with some real social issues. I can't say that it speaks to the African experience. Again, we're talking about a fictional country, but he does grapple with some heavy stuff. So certainly, that out. Yeah, that's all I can think of off the top of my head.
Wow. All right. Well, gosh, are you going to be able to stay for the rest of the program?
Yeah, I don't mind if y'all have me around.
All right, awesome.
No.
So, Janet, what's going on?
Well, we have a few things. Nothing really, really big. First off, this actually was an older story. It kind of was one of these things, you see it on Facebook and kind of comes around again, and then you realize, oh my God, it's from last year. But it was a question about whether recalled gear shifters in the Jeep Cherokee had contributed to the death of Anton Yelchin. And so the article's old, so I don't really want to go rehash into that. However, I do have an update in the sense that there was a recent lawsuit from a woman just outside of Detroit, actually, and she was suing Fiat Chrysler about the exact same shifters. So this is an endemic problem that, and they did recall the defective merchandise, but unfortunately, people were injured and were killed by it. And I've handled product liability suits, and so it should be kind of interesting to see what happens with the Yelchin estate.
And that one still stings.
Oh, absolutely. He was a very young man. So, and it had to have been a frightening end. So anyway, I'm a ray of sunshine today. So maybe we'll move on to something a little more little more pleasant. So one of the things we've been doing is these little extras. They're real short. They're like a 5-minute video or a 10-minute video, and like a blog post of maybe 350 words or so. It's not meant to be a really deep dive. More like to try to get some of the, we get people send us URLs all the time, and I get them from all sorts of places. Like I'll get them on Twitter, or somebody will send me a Facebook DM, or they'll send me an email or something. So I have to look in all these different places, and they'll say, "Oh my God, I can't believe XYZ happened." So I've been trying to gather these up and kind of parse them out into topics that make some sense. And the most recent one that has been released is about Elvis. More particularly about Elvis impersonators and how legal they are, and kind of how the estate has treated them, how they've reacted to them, because the Presley estate has sort of changed its mind over the decades. Originally they kind of they were sort of pushing not necessarily in the copyright sense, but they were kind of telling people, you got to stop here because you're not, you're sort of giving a representation, although obviously you're not, this isn't really the king. But as the parts of the estate were sold off and less of it was owned by the family, it became more and more accepted by the owners of the Presley legacy, as it were, to allow for impersonators and to give them some positives, and that may also be because of the more time that goes between now and when Elvis had died, and so it becomes more and more obvious that even if people think that they saw Elvis, quote unquote, even if you think that there's a sighting, he was born in the 1930s. He couldn't possibly look like he did in the 70s. It's it's an obvious thing, whereas it wasn't quite so obvious within a few years after he had passed on. The other thing that has been going on is a return to those thrilling days of yesteryear with Axanar.
Oh God.
Yeah. For those who do not recall or who maybe did not know, Axanar was a Star Trek fan film that kind of sort of went off the rails, I guess is the best way of putting it. It was they had crowdfunded over $1.4 million. The group did put out like a teaser, and they put out a few other things, but they were very small. They were not really the full film that had been promised, and a lot of the money got tied up in a warehouse in Valencia, California, that they were attempting to convert into a studio. And what happened in the last month is they decided for yet another round of crowdfunding, which I think is the fourth, because there had been a Kickstarter before, and there had been an Indiegogo before. So maybe this was the third, my error. And this is a second Indiegogo. And they had wanted, I believe it was about $60,000 in order to try to stay in the Valencia property. And instead, it was a failed crowdfunding. They only raised about $22,000, $23,000 or something like that. However, they had what's called flexible funding, and when you sign up for that in Indiegogo, I believe that you're required to hand over a bigger chunk of what you get, but you're still allowed to keep what you get, even if you don't make your goal. Whereas if you don't, sign up for flexible funding, if you don't make your goal, then you got to give everything back. So they did get to keep a percentage of what they had raised. And so what they are doing with that is they are moving across the country to the Atlanta, Georgia area. This apparently is where Mr. Peters hails from, or at least he's got family contacts and there. So, and there is evidently evidently there is a property out there where they're going to be moving to, I think within the next week or two. I don't have the exact dates on that. And that's probably taking the entirety of what was raised on this second Indiegogo to get trucks and to send them out there. So they are going out there. Now, are they going to make Axanar? I think they're going to try for yet another round of crowdfunding, so this would be the fourth. At some point, this is the law of diminishing returns happens with crowdfunding, and
Kill it with fire.
Yeah, and this is nothing new. It's not just them. It happens with every kind of crowdfunding. The numbers keep getting smaller and smaller, and so I don't think they're going to see the great heights of numbers that they saw before. And I think people are very tired of this, and that has nothing to do with quote unquote haters, and it has nothing even to do with when CBS and Paramount had sued them. It's really just a matter of timing. I think the timing is kind of off, because this has been promised for a long time. It hasn't come, and it hasn't come, and it hasn't come. And I think that the fans are kind of, they're turning their interest elsewhere.
Well, and also, like, it hasn't come after $1.4 million.
Yeah, that's the other thing that's kind of a concern to a lot of people. And I know that the folks in the Axanar camp, they have asked why people like us and Carlos Pedraza, who runs Axamonitor, why we continue to be interested in what's going on with them. Why haven't we moved on? We should have lives. Don't you people have lives? Well, you know something? I do have a life, as does Carlos, as does Shanna, as do all of us. Believe me, this is not something that I toss and turn about every single night by any stretch of the imagination, or any night for that matter. But I do continue to cover this, first off, because it's in our wheelhouse of what we cover. But beyond that, it's also because I don't want to see fans... I want to see them get what they're paying for, and when they put money into crowdfunding, I want to see them get a product for that. It might not be exactly the product that they were hoping for. It might not be absolutely perfect. And yes, there are a lot of crowdfunding, a lot of delays in crowdfunding. I mean, I don't want to get on a tear, but crowdfunding could probably use some serious regulation, and I don't think that's going to come anytime soon. But I'm willing to continue covering this because I do want to see fans satisfied with whatever happens with this organization. That's what I care about. What happens to fans is really it.
And the other thing that I've noticed coming along with that, like, you're talking about the whole, oh, well, don't you have lives thing, is also a dismissal of other people's expertise. And that's
yes.
kind of a major problem in our society, just in general anyway. But, if we were losers and if we were nobodies, Janet wouldn't have passed the bar. I wouldn't be in a PhD program. I wouldn't be teaching television production. I mean, these are things that we know a little something about. We're not, losers. We're not big, famous, Hollywood people, but we know a little bit about in fact, we know a lot, really, about how these things get made, how they work, how they're supposed to work. And I don't know. I'm just going to put it out there. It's really disrespectful.
Yeah, it's, again, and it's also kind of this, how dare you ask? How dare you wonder what's happened? Well, of course I'm going to wonder what's happened, because over $1 million was raised, and there ain't no movie, and there pretty much ain't no studio. Because my understanding is that, again, it's once again a warehouse property, and once again there's a 3-year lease on it. So once again, this is going to require a conversion, and those things don't happen for free. I don't know where that money's going to come from, and I do hope that donors realize, and I hope they understand, that look at the track record. I think that's important, is look at the track record. And I mean, are you happy with what you've seen? And hey, donors, if you're happy with what you've seen and you want to hand over more cash, I'm not going to stop you. I mean, presumably you're adults and you're competent, and I'm not going to stop you. I'm not going to tell you how to spend your money any more than I hope you're going to try to tell me how to spend mine. But at the same time, I do want to warn the unsuspecting folks who maybe don't really know all of the background, because that is of concern to me. Like I said, I want people to be satisfied with what they're getting, and I want them to be getting what they're asking for, as to the best of the ability of the people behind this, or behind this this particular film.
Go ahead.
I
Yes,
was going to say, I have a quick question. Because I am only passingly familiar with what is happening, and I've only just realized through Googling that Axanar is a film and not a person. And I only know about this from the hatred that radiates from Shanna from time to time in the grad office.
Oh, snap. Thanks, Gabe. Because I'm such a hater. I'm probably the queen hater, right?
That's you. Rules with an iron fist. Or rather a steel curler. And so is my understanding that this is a sort of a snake oil kind of situation, that people are dumping money into a thing that is likely to never happen?
I hope that it's not. I hope it's not. I mean, to my mind, it feels like people sending good money after bad. Because it's big money was put into this, and we know that there have been other productions that have created and delivered and have raised less money.
Mm-hmm.
So for that kind of cash, why isn't there anything there? And also, why
Right.
was this? Why was the cash put into a thoroughly unnecessary location? Because they certainly did. I mean, I know that Mr. Peters, who was the CEO and whatnot of Axanar, I know that he needed a place for his props, but that's his own business. And people
Sure.
who were donating for a fan film should not have been paying for that.
Yeah, well, north of $1 million. I mean, I know that the movies cost quite a bit, but I would imagine that $1 million should be sufficient for more than what seems to have been produced.
Yes.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, it's that there's so much was put in, and why was so little taken out, and I mean, I personally looked at numbers actually for the LA area. How much does it cost to rent a studio? Just how much does it cost to rent a studio? And it's a few $1,000s a day. And sometimes it's a little more because you need more equipment or whatever, but maybe you need more people on set for some reason or another, because lighting or whatnot. However, it definitely doesn't cost $1 million. And furthermore, we're talking about a fan film here, so it should have been something that was fairly short. And in fact, these days, there are guidelines written by CBS and Paramount for creating Star Trek fan films. So, and those are supposed to be that you can only do 2 15-minute segments. So if you're filming, but let's even go pre-guidelines. Let's say that you're filming a 2-hour flick. Fine, you're filming a 2-hour flick. How many days does that take for you to film it? Spoiler alert, I'm not even in this business, but I know for a fact it doesn't take 3 years. So why was there a 3-year lease?
That's an excellent question.
Bueller? Anyone?
It's like talking to my class when I ask them if they've done the reading.
I'm really sorry, Miss Gilkison, I haven't done the reading. Very sorry.
God, I wish someone would have the stones to just say that. Just fess up. That's all,
There was a dog sitting on my lap, and I couldn't move for 6 hours yesterday. I really couldn't. I meant to, but I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
In my case, it's a cat, and it's usually true. But
See, it's a good excuse. Anyway,
this is kind of tying into what Gabe and I were talking about earlier too. Like the reason why there's a need for critical scholarship and examining who has the power, because you have people like Carlos and Janet and myself. We have slightly different areas of expertise, but we all have some kind of expertise in things like this, and so not everybody has that kind of expertise, and not everybody has a voice. So if you're wondering why we're so interested in this and why we're following this, it's because somebody's got to speak for the people who don't have a voice.
Well, and I would imagine, just the ethics behind taking money from people, and who I'm reminded of, like those alternative medicine kind of things, right? Where they convince people to give money when they should really be spending it on medication,
Yes. Oh, hey, look, I remember Laetrile in the 70s. People were spending money on that instead of chemotherapy.
Yeah. And so, people and fans are very passionate about this kind of stuff. I mean, I'd throw Lord knows how much money at some sort of adaptation of one of the Lord of the Rings stories that aren't included in the 20 some hours that we have already. It's, that would probably be grocery money anyway. So yeah, I get the ethics behind that is unreal, I would imagine.
Well, there are, it's happened before where crowdfunding has resulted in litigation. Actually, one of the extras that I recorded is about crowdfunding and about how it's kind of collided with legal, because it was in the Pacific Northwest. I want to say it was Oregon. Where the Attorney General got involved and said, okay, well, under my watch, if anybody says they're going to do this and they take crowdfunding and they don't deliver, we're going to come after you. So things are changing, but we have a conservative government in power. And so the chances of getting regulation aren't terribly high, simply because of the political environment right now. But I think that crowdfunding is really, really ripe for some sort of regulation. I mean, if you invest in a startup, let's say you're an angel investor, you're not a venture capitalist, the big shot, you're an angel investor. So, this is your cousin or whatever, and you put in $200, let's say. The Securities and Exchange Commission gives you some protections, but there's nothing for crowdfunding.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, you go.
We did this for a while.
No, so I was just wondering, there was this thing, from the White House about, they're considering rolling back the FCC regulations for net neutrality, and a lot of crowdfunded or a lot of new films that are produced, especially independent films or fan films, that kind of stuff, live and breathe on the internet, and just how that kind of thing. Because you mentioned, the conservative party in power. Impacting this kind of stuff. That was just sort of where my mind went. Once FCC regulations are taken away, how's that going to squash this sort of expression or fan-made production?
I think it'll go underground. I think that's more what'll happen is that you won't see quite so much of it, and you'll see it distributed in different ways. But I think that this genie's already out of the bottle.
It's like the fanzines back in the day before the internet, the way fan fiction and fan art were shared before. A lot of them were very underground, especially if they contained, sexually explicit material and slash things of that nature. You kind of, it was almost like the literary equivalent of a speakeasy. Like, you had to know someone, you had to kind of like have somebody vouch for you, that kind of thing. So you had to know, some of them were blatantly available on dealer tables at conventions, but if your particular fandom was one that had been targeted by an IP owner because they didn't like your content, you went underground and you communicated by mail, because that's what we did back then in the Stone Age and the 80s.
Remember.
Back in the 1900s.
Right. So, I mean, there's ways to push it underground, and, the tradition of people writing fan fiction under a pen name comes from the fact that, people knew that it might be a copyright infringement. But, again, whether something falls into fair use or not, it has to be decided by a judge. But people were just basically doing their best to stay off the radar and stay underground. So I'm sure fan films would go the same way. I mean, I guess if you were hosting it online somewhere, you would just call it something else. You wouldn't use your real name, that kind of thing. Private servers, that kind of stuff. I mean, it's doable, and here I'm giving the criminal element all kinds of ideas on how to do it, because that's what I do. But I mean, there's ways around it, and historically, the more heavy-handed IP owners have been about cracking down, the more tempted people are going to be to try to slip through your fingers. And guess what? They succeed. So, for the longest time, we just kind of had this uneasy and unspoken understanding between people who did fan works and IP owners. But now, because of crowdfunding and because of people just, running riot and taking huge advantage of it and taking advantage of other fans, that uneasy truce is eroding. And that's my concern in the issue.
So, on that note, CBS owns the rights to Star Trek, don't they?
Paramount. Yeah, CBS and Paramount together.
So
yes,
have they not put a foot on Axanar's neck? I mean, have they weighed in on this? I would imagine they have.
Well, they sued them.
There was a whole lawsuit, yeah.
Oh, wow, okay. So,
which settled a few months ago. And it was a suit about IP infringement, regardless of what anybody else thinks. If you read the pleadings, it is all about IP infringement. And no, nobody was jealous of anybody else. It had nothing to do with Star Trek Discovery. It was IP infringement, pure and simple. It was copyright. And they showed a number of side-by-side comparisons of things like ship designs, costumes, makeup, and whatnot. And the images were pretty damning, I would say.
Okay.
So this all stretched out for about a year, and then finally it settled at the end of 2016. But I was going to say something, and now I've completely forgotten what it was. So it was probably a lie.
Shame on you.
One of them alternative foods, right?
Alternative facts.
Alternative
facts. So anyway, I don't want to beat an axe in our dead horse, but at the same time, I do want to keep up with what is going on. But it's obviously this is not my big focus in life, and it's not going to be our show's big focus in life at all. But there was news, so we're reporting it. But we have news about a different fandom, about X-Files. I know you're very excited about it, Jana.
I'm so stoked. Season 11 has just been announced within the last week. So, from what I can tell so far, it looks like David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson have both signed for it, or at least will sign, which makes sense because Gillian Anderson is done with The Fall and Hannibal is done. Duchovny was on Aquarius, and that's done now. So, it seems that their schedules have freed up. From what I can tell, too, it's going to be 10 episodes, so more than last season, but still a short season. I'm kind of hoping that they emphasize the Monster of the Week episodes, although they will have to kind of do that mythology arc just because of the cliffhanger from season 10. But I don't know, Janet. I think that when the time gets closer, like maybe we need to get some X-Files superfans on the show with us and maybe have an X-Files roundtable.
Oh hell yeah, definitely, definitely. No, I'm happy to we'll expand our fandom horizons, of course.
Yeah, and that's where the listeners come in too, because we talk about the fandoms that we talk about because we're familiar with them. Obviously, you can't be a fan of everything, especially in this age of, digital access. I mean, it's even gone beyond cable now. We have so much digital access that there's only so many things that you can come up with. But if there are things that you guys want to talk about, even if it's not our fandom, we'll go find experts to come on the show and school us on it. So please keep those ideas coming.
And that reminds me of what we're going to talk about on our next show.
What are we going to talk about?
We are going to. So I'm in the independent author space, and what has been really a lot of fun to watch from the NaNoWriMo folks, which that all stands for November is National Novel Writing Month. It's where you write a 50,000 word novel in 30 days, and I've been participating in this for a few years, and in fact, that's how I got published. But what has been lots of fun is watching people blossom, watch them go from, oh my God, I don't think I can write 40 words in a day, let alone 1,700 or whatever, but starting to spread their wings, publish. I'm actually traditionally published, but a lot of other people, they're self-published, or sometimes indie authors will get together, create quote unquote a publishing company, and that will do the publishing. These two guys who we are going to have on are both self-published, and they both kind of come in. What is so neat is what they're doing is they're creating fandoms from scratch. And not to give you too much of a spoiler on this one, I know that these names aren't known to you, but I hope that they will be known to you soon. Author Ronnie Verdi is kind of burning up the urban fantasy little charts in Amazon. That it's very exciting to see how he keeps getting better, and people are very interested in him. And Brandon Varnell has been writing it's Kitsune, I believe, is what it's called, and both of them also show the power of an amazing cover, I might add, which we can't tell you on the air, but I'm hoping we'll have some pictures for the blog. But I'm real excited to be having them in a month. That's what's going to happen.
I'm stoked. That sounds really, really cool, and it's a little different from other things that we've done before, so I think that's going to be really neat.
Yay!
I'm sorry. I don't know if y'all can hear that in the background, but my dog is having a fit.
Oh.
Sorry, doggy.
That's okay. Our listeners are used to my cats stepping all over me and on the keyboard and stuff. So it's a pet-friendly podcast.
Oh, good, because this Bichon is 15 pounds pretentious, and he's getting on my nerves.
He needs little liver treats.
Yeah. Oh boy. Boy, that's so. That does sound interesting. I'll have to check that out, especially. I'm sort of new to the area of fandom, I'll admit, despite having been a fan, not being much of one on the internet. Although I did do a foray into it for a paper and on Daredevil and fan expressions and stuff, which I can't unsee, however many times I try. But as a newfound wealth of data to analyze, certainly.
Yeah. When you get to be like Gabe and I, it's just everything that you look at is a data set.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's not even just a show you like anymore, or it's not a forum that you participate on. It's a data set.
Yep. That's why I've watched Daredevil 3 times now.
Yeah, well, it's from writing. I watch things now, and I pick apart things like, oh, I can see where the writer got bored and needed to suddenly shake things up, or oh my God, why didn't they research this? What the hell's wrong with you people? I'm seeing the seams, and it's not pretty.
Yeah, I got a friend who is in Atlanta who works on movies, and actually he's working on Avengers: Infinity Wars. And so, but I was down visiting him some time ago, and he was like, "Yeah, now I can see all the seams of the TV shows, and it hurts." It's like, well, the price you pay, I guess. You know,
looking behind the curtain, it's never pretty.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Do we have announcements of any sort?
X-Files was my big announcement, and Julia's job. Like those are. I'm tired and I want to be done with the semester. That's my announcement.
Okay. And I'm looking forward to going to Cape Cod because we haven't been in several months, so I want to hopefully not get too much of a sunburn.
Gabe, do you have announcements?
I recently found out that I was published, so that's nice.
Yeah!
Yay! Oh, okay. Well, so you sit on that all the way until the end.
Well, no. So I wrote. So there's. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the Pop Culture and Philosophy book series.
No.
No, it's so
yeah, they take. They get authors to write, they get scholars to write chapters about philosophical issues through the lens of pop culture. So, like, I've got a couple. One's Pink Floyd and philosophy, and one is Game of Thrones and philosophy. And that one actually had some interesting stuff about, Hobbes and the state and social contracts and whatnot. Anyway, so I wrote a chapter for Deadpool in philosophy, which was on Antonio Gramsci and his idea of coalition building and superstructures and, unionizing and that kind of stuff. And so I had fun writing it. I can't guarantee how good it is, but I enjoyed it. And so I knew it was heading to the press around December, and I looked it up the other day, and it's on Amazon and whatnot. So, so that's cool.
Fantastic.
That's really cool. So, hey, listeners, if you want to read some smart people stuff, look up, and what's it called again, Gabe? For everybody,
Deadpool. It's Deadpool and Philosophy is the name of the book. I don't get any money either way. So, like, pirate or something. I don't.
No, we don't talk about that. We'll put the link into the blog post.
Nice.
So we'll have to shake you down for that.
Right on.
All right. So okay. Cats, they're sleeping. They don't have any announcements. So yeah, I think we're done with announcements.
Okay. So thank you so much, Gabe. And it's been a real pleasure. This has been a great show. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Gabe.
All right, so thank you everyone for listening. Peace out, live long, prosper, do whatever the hell you want to. Don't get a sunburn. Use sunscreen. Thanks.
And remember, the truth is out there.
I don't have anything to add.
On that happy note, thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Music provided by Invocation Array. Send mail to hosts@semanticshenanigans.com. Follow us on Twitter at 2shenanigans. That's the number, not the word. 2shenanigans. On Facebook, you can find us at Semantic Shenanigans. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Semantic Shenanigans. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time right here on Semantic Shenanigans.